Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Just a Girl Talking Trash. I'm so glad you're here with me. I am your host, Tommy Lynn, and whether you're driving a trash truck, operating heavy equipment, working in a transfer station, a landfill, manufacturing, construction, public works, or sitting behind a desk somewhere trying to become a better leader, this podcast is for you. Around here, we don't just talk trash, we talk leadership. We talk about the conversations people avoid. We talk about the lessons nobody teaches. And we talk about becoming the kind of leaders people actually want to work for. Today's episode is one that I've wanted to do for a while because I hear people say the same thing over and over again. HR doesn't care. HR is useless. HR is supposed to protect employees. I'm calling HR. And every time I hear those statements, I realize something. Most people don't actually understand what human resources is supposed to do. Now, before we get started, let me make something very clear. This episode is not about defending HR. It is also not about criticizing HR. This episode is about understanding the role of HR so that employees, supervisors, managers, and even executives know where their responsibilities begin and where they end. Because when we misunderstand someone's role, we create unrealistic expectations. And unrealistic expectations create frustration. So today, we're going to clear up some of those misunderstandings. And yes, some of what I say today might make people uncomfortable, but leadership isn't about comfort. Leadership is about truth. Now, let me also say this. I have worked with some incredible HR professionals. I've also worked with some that had room to grow, just like I've worked with phenomenal supervisors and some supervisors who should have never been promoted. That's true in every profession. There are good leaders, there are average leaders, and there are people who simply have a title. So this isn't about attacking a department. It's about helping all of us understand how organizations function. Because the better we understand each other's roles, the better we will work together. Now, what people think HR does, let's start with a question. When you hear the words human resource, what comes to mind? For a lot of people, HR is where you go when you're upset. It is where you go when someone hurts your feelings. It's where you go when your supervisor makes a decision you don't like. It's where you go when your coworker annoys you. Some people genuinely believe HR exists to make everyone happy, but that's not actually their job. HR isn't customer service for employees. HR isn't workplace therapy. It isn't there to referee every disagreement between two adults. That's one of the biggest misconceptions I feel in today's workplace. Now, does HR care about people? Absolutely. Most HR professionals choose that career because they genuinely enjoy helping people. But helping people doesn't always mean giving the answer they want. Sometimes helping people means holding them accountable. Sometimes it means explaining policy. And sometimes, unfortunately, it means saying no. And there are times it means telling an employee, this is a conversation you need to have with your supervisor. That isn't HR ignoring you. That is HR doing their job. So what does HR actually do? Well, I'm going to simplify it for you. HR exists to help organizations manage people while ensuring fairness, consistency, compliance, and legal responsibility. Think about everything HR is responsible for. And I'm going to list it to you so that you know, because some people listening may not actually know. So here it goes. They are responsible for recruiting, hiring, benefits, payroll support, leaves of absence, policy interpretation, training, investigations, performance guidance, documentation, compliance with employment laws, supporting leaders, managing risks, employee relations, and that is just scratching the surface. And that there is already a lot. Now, imagine if HR had to stop what they were doing every single time someone called because my coworker didn't say good morning. My supervisor looked at me funny today. They gave me a different route. They corrected me in front of people. They're not my favorite person. Can you imagine? They'd never get anything else done. And that's why understanding the chain of responsibility 100% matters. Now, here's the part that may surprise you. One of the best HR professionals I have ever worked with taught leaders something I will never forget. And they said, good leadership solves problems at the lowest possible level. I have never forgotten that because it is so true. If two employees have a misunderstanding, can their supervisors coach them through it? And if the answer is yes, then that is where it should start. If someone has questions about expectations, is their manager able to explain them? And if the answer is yes, that is where it should start. If there's confusion about communication, can leadership address it? Absolutely. That is leadership. Every disagreement doesn't need to become an HR investigation. Every uncomfortable conversation isn't a policy violation. Sometimes people simply need to communicate respectfully, professionally, and honestly. And sometimes we don't do enough anymore. We have to stop avoiding difficult conversations. One thing I have learned throughout my career is that people are becoming more uncomfortable having direct conversations instead of talking to each other. They like to text. They complain to coworkers. They vent to everyone except the person they actually need to speak with. Or they immediately will say, I'm going to HR. So, can I challenge you with something? Before you assume someone had bad intentions, have a conversation respectfully. Ask questions. Seeking understanding before making assumptions, because sometimes what feels personal was never personal at all. I have had employees come to me convinced another employee was intentionally disrespecting them. And then we sat everyone down. We had an honest conversation and discovered the entire issue was a misunderstanding. No malicious intent, no bullying, no retaliation. just poor communication. And imagine if they had skipped that conversation and immediately escalated everything. Relationships would have been damaged for no reason. And that's why communication is one of the greatest leadership skills you will ever develop. So here is today's leadership fundamental. Are you ready? Not every problem requires HR. That's it. That's your leadership fundamental for the day. Sometimes it requires courage. The courage to have a respectful conversation, the courage to ask questions, the courage to listen, the courage to assume positive intent until the facts tell you otherwise. Great workplaces aren't built because people avoid conflict. They are built because people learn how to navigate conflict with professionalism and respect. And that starts with every single one of us. It's like, I sometimes think that the employees believe that HR is somehow a complaint hotline for every inconvenience. I just, I often wonder where they even came up with that assumption that HR is their complaint hotline. Because somewhere along the way, many workplaces, I think, created this idea that HR is the first phone call every time something goes wrong. And I want to challenge that thinking. Not because the concerns don't matter, not because their feelings are not real or your feelings are not real, but because organizations function best when problems are addressed at the right level. So let's be honest again for a minute. How many times have you heard someone say, I am calling HR? Sometimes they haven't even talked to the person they are upset with yet. They have not even talked to their supervisor. They haven't talked to their supervisor's manager. They haven't talked to the GM. They haven't even asked a single question, but yet they've already decided in their mind that the next step is HR. Well, let me tell you something. That mindset is not going to help anyone. If every disagreement immediately becomes an HR issue, we are skipping one of the most important parts of healthy workplace communication. There is a difference between conflict and misconduct. Conflict happens. People have different personalities. They have different communication styles, different backgrounds, different expectations. Misconduct is different. Misconduct involves violations of policy, ethics, safety, or the law. As leaders and employees, we have to learn the difference. In my experience, one of the first questions a good HR professional often asks is, when an employee calls them, have you spoken with your supervisor? And if the answer is no, they may encourage you to start there. Unless the situation involves something that clearly requires immediate HR attention, such as harassment, discrimination, threats, retaliation, or another serious policy concern. And then they may ask, have you talked with your supervisor's manager? Why? Because supervisors are expected to lead. Managers are expected to manage, and HR is there to support the process not replace it. So let's think about it. If every small disagreement skips leadership entirely, how are supervisors ever supposed to develop the skills to coach people, resolve conflict, and build stronger teams? Leadership isn't learned by avoiding difficult conversations. It is learned by having them. I want to give you an example. So imagine an employee walks into HR and says, "My supervisor corrected me in front of everyone." Okay. That doesn't automatically mean the supervisor did something wrong. The next questions matter. What was said? How was it said? What happened before the correction? Was it about safety? Was it about policy? Was anyone else corrected? Was the employee embarrassed? Could the supervisor have handled it better? Those are very different questions than simply assuming someone is guilty because a complaint was made. Now, let's flip the example. What if a supervisor is constantly yelling at employees or humiliating them or threatening them or retaliating against people who speak up? I know that no one does that, but what if they did? That is a completely different conversation. That's the kind of situation that deserves immediate attention because the context matter, facts matter, and that's exactly why investigations exist. Leaders, do not push your job onto HR. I want to speak directly to the supervisors and managers who are listening because this part is for you. One of the easiest things a leader can do is say, "Go talk to HR." But easy doesn't always mean effective. If an employee comes to you with a concern that you have the authority and responsibility to address, don't immediately pass it off. You need to listen, you need to ask questions, and you need to stay calm, gather information, coach where coaching is needed, correct where correction is needed, document when documentation is appropriate. And if the issue grows beyond your role, then partner with HR. That is leadership. HR should be a partner, not a substitute for leadership. And stop managing through emails and complaints. Here is something that I have learned over the years. Many workplace problems aren't caused by bad people. They are caused by poor communication. One person assumes, and then another person gets defensive. Someone else starts talking to coworkers instead of the person involved. Pretty soon, there are 5 different versions of the same story. And listen, I have worked in the waste industry, and let me tell you, gossip runs through the yard like wildfire. Nobody knows what's true anymore once we allow that to happen. We have to dead the issue before it can even get started, before it even starts to fester, before it even becomes a problem. We have to get a handle on it and control it right then and there. We cannot avoid it. And then once that happens, if we don't do those steps, everyone wants HR to untangle it. Imagine how much stronger our workplace would be if more people simply sat down and had respectful conversations. No shouting matches, no gossip sessions, conversations. Sometimes the hardest conversation is the one that solves the problem. But listen, accountability goes both ways. This is another thing we don't talk about enough. I just feel that we don't. Leadership requires accountability, but so does being an employee. If you're constantly late, own it. If you made a mistake, own it. If someone coaches you, listen before you become defensive. If policy applies to everyone, it applies to you too. Being held accountable doesn't automatically mean you're being treated unfairly. Sometimes accountability is exactly what helps us to grow. And I know I have had people correct me throughout my career more times than I can count. And sometimes I agreed, sometimes I did not. But I learned from those moments. Growth doesn't happen when we're only told we're doing great. Growth happens when we are willing to hear the hard truths. Listen, great leaders do not forward every problem they develop the skills to solve the problems they are responsible for. I'm going to say that again. Great leaders do not forward every problem. They develop the skills to solve the problems they are responsible for. That doesn't mean they know everything. It means they're willing to listen, they're willing to learn, they're willing to have uncomfortable conversations, and they are humble enough to ask HR for guidance when a situation truly calls for it. The strongest organizations aren't the ones where HR handles every issue. They're the ones where supervisors lead well, managers support their teams, employees communicate professionally, and HR is able to focus on the issues that genuinely require their expertise. But I do want to talk about this before we end, right? When should you go directly to HR? Now, I did touch on it for a few minutes, but I need you to hear me out. Because my hope is that you leave here understanding HR. My hope isn't that you leave here thinking more highly of HR, but that you understand it. Because understanding each other's roles make us all better employees, better supervisors, and better leaders. Now, let's answer the question everyone has been waiting for. When should you go directly to HR? And the answer is so simple. When the issue involves something that cannot or should not be handled through your normal leadership chain, HR needs to know. So, for example, if you are dealing with harassment, discrimination, retaliation for reporting concerns, threats of violence, serious safety concerns that are not being addressed, ethics violations, fraud, or another significant policy issue, those are situations where HR should 100% absolutely be involved. Those issues deserve attention. Those issues deserve documentation. And those issues deserve a fair and thorough review. And sometimes people are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be labeled as a troublemaker. Let me say this clearly. If someone is violating policy, or creating an unsafe workplace or treating people unlawfully, reporting it isn't causing problems. It is helping protect people and the organization. There is a big difference between avoiding unnecessary escalation and staying silent about serious issues. One is leadership. The other can allow problems to grow. So let's talk about the people behind the job title. The best HR professionals, again, I have worked with, weren't the loudest people in the room. They didn't make decisions based on who told the most emotional story. They didn't decide who was right before hearing both sides. They listened, they asked questions, they reviewed documentation, they compared the facts with policy, They protected confidentiality whenever possible, and they understood that fairness doesn't always mean everyone gets the outcome they wanted. And that can be very hard because no matter what decision is made, someone is usually disappointed. HR does not have the luxury of making decisions based only on emotions. They have to consider facts, policy, consistency, and the law. That responsibility is heavier than many people realize. Now, let's shift gears and speak directly to the leaders listening. Whether you're leading 2 people or 200, your team is watching you every single day. They're watching how you communicate, how you respond under pressure, how you handle mistakes, and how you treat the newest employee, how you treat the employees who've been there for 20 years. Leadership isn't just about making decisions. It is about building trust, and trust isn't built by avoiding difficult conversations. It is built by showing up consistently. A great leader doesn't ignore problems. You understand? I'm going to say it again. A great leader does not ignore problems. A great leader addresses them early. A great leader doesn't embarrass people for making mistakes. They coach them. A great leader doesn't play favorites. They apply standards consistently. A great leader doesn't gossip about their employees. And that's a shame that we have to say that, but it is true. They do not gossip about their employees. They protect their dignity. A great leader does not see HR as the enemy. They should see HR as a partner. One of the strongest leadership lessons I've learned is this. If you only are talking to HR after everything has fallen apart, you have waited too long. Build the relationship before you need it. Ask questions, seek guidance, learn from each other. When operations and HR work together instead of against each other, everyone benefits. Now, if you are not in management and you're not in the leadership team and you are just an employee, I also want to speak directly to you. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve a workplace free from harassment and discrimination. You deserve to work in an environment where safety matters. But with those rights also comes responsibilities. Communicate respectfully. You need to always follow the chain of command when appropriate. Ask questions before making assumptions. You need to be open to coaching. Accept accountability when you've made a mistake. And remember that not every uncomfortable conversation is unfair treatment. Sometimes growth feels uncomfortable. Sometimes correction feels personal when it's really about improving performance. I have always told all of my frontline team members that this is never personal, it is business. Because it is not. I have never based any of my decisions, any of my coaching off of my personal feelings. It was business related. The goal isn't to avoid feedback. The goal is for you to learn from it. And before I close, I want to leave you with one final thought, and I'm done. Organizations do not become stronger because they have perfect policies. They become stronger because they have people who chose integrity every day. Supervisors who lead with consistency. Managers who communicate with respect. Employees who take ownership of their actions. HR professionals who apply policy fairly and thoughtfully. When each person understands their role and works together, the workplace becomes healthier for everyone. Leadership is not about winning arguments, folks. It is about solving problems. It is not about proving something wrong. It is about helping people succeed. It is not about avoiding conflict. Stop avoiding conflict. It is about navigating conflict with professionalism, honesty, and respect. And maybe that is the biggest lesson from today's episode. HR is not your enemy. Your supervisor isn't automatically your enemy. Your employee isn't automatically your enemy. Most of the time, the real enemy is poor communication, broken trust, inconsistency, leadership, and the unwillingness to have honest conversations. If we can prove those things, we won't eliminate every workplace problem, but we will handle them better. And that is what leadership is all about. If this episode challenged your perspective, sparked a conversation, or helped you better understand the partnership between leadership and HR, I hope you will share it. And if someone could benefit from it, send it to them. Until next time, keep leading with integrity, keep serving with purpose, keep learning every day. And remember, we don't just talk trash, we build better leaders. I'm your host, and this is Just a Girl Talking Trash.